here, seeing you all face to face. Very interesting indeed. It's been 13 to 15 years. I've been dealing with this research on the building sectors, talking about the buildings. What I did was doing a life cycle energy analysis. Zero energy building, something very interesting. At the time, we haven't really heard much. But when we talk about the buildings, on the life cycle energy analysis, not only the operational part, but looking at on the production part of the materials, and also go back on the quarry activities, including the transportation to transfer or to commute those materials. The perspective of life cycle energy analysis is very crucial at that moment, and to looking at the future to make it buildings zero emissions. Those are quite important. However, to looking at the whole story is very difficult, very complicated. A lot of measures, a lot of data need to be collected. And of course, policy have to be strengthened to looking at the whole perspective of the life cycles. Even in the end of the material itself, in the end of the buildings, need to be considered. That the net zero emission, or even we call it the net zero energy. However, we are going a very progressive activities right now, and the net zero buildings, it is very crucial because 85% of those emission of the energy consumed during the operational, definitely. Right. So looking at those, so we can start from the perspective of low-hanging fruits, the perspective of where we need to start rather than we looking at the more complex way. However, by looking at the more complex way, we can start something important and crucial, then lead to something that we are later on will achieve. So basically, I'm talking about policy. So from the detailed perspective, 15 years back, now in the perspective of generalists, people say it is important to link up between details matters that presented previously by our distinguished speakers from NUS and also Ichino Zezang. Very important to see the micro meso activities and looking at to translate into the policies. But I believe your point is that the gap is still wide, right? Ichino-san. The gap is still very wide between the research activities and the implementation and perhaps the policy and regulation. So this is our work to really link up and looking at in what perspective that we can start with. In what step by step that we need to do. This workshop, therefore, is very important. ASEAN, the pathways. So I'm talking about ASEAN, a bit more detail in ASEAN. Of course, we are the fast-growing region, one of those in globally. We are going to be the fourth largest economic in the 2050 after China, India, and States. Even comparing to States in 2050, which is 4 trillion behind. So approximately 34 trillion US dollar United States, and ASEAN will be 30 trillion US dollars. So those are very small gap, and looking at the consumption of the energy sector, especially on the demand side, and the building in this perspective is very, very fast. So therefore it's very important. Energy efficiency and conservation and RE are the main strategies for achieving carbon neutrality in member states. So the synergy between energy efficiency and RE has a critical role to reduce energy-related greenhouse gases and address supply and demand challenges. Digitalization, one of those, and also critical. The digital technologies adoption can be increased at the whole building level and among end use such as heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, lighting, of course, and also appliances, to help balance demand with supply at different time scales and avoid transmission and capacity constraints. Our member state, we call it ASEAN member state, have a set up energy efficiency and conservation related strategies. The individual energy efficiency target and action plan from each member state can support and would support to pursue the aspirational goal of reducing regional energy intensity in 2025. The member states have specified energy efficiency targets for their own countries based on the energy saving or energy intensity or energy consumption. And the establishment of national level target implies that each member state is committed to increasing energy efficiency in the region. And across member states, each country has created a dedicated timeline and also demarcated its national area of focus. The mandatory energy management system is a common policy for the application of E&C practices, and also required the energy intensive establishment to implement EMS in their respective energy efficiency law, act, and decree. The threshold value and units are varied from amongst the member states, and all countries include commercial building within the scope of coverage. Malaysia and Cambodia only covers electrical system, for example. The energy management is critical strategy, therefore, to enhance efficient and low carbon buildings. Ultimately, it will contribute to the whole carbon neutrality goals. If you're looking at this table, the commercial demand is expected to increase by 4-fold in 2050 compared to the 2020 levels, which is at 29 million ton oil equivalent. And commercial sectors is highly electrified with an electricity share of 65% of the energy sector requirements. Hence, it could benefit most from use of efficient lighting and of course, cooling. However, it is also consumes biomass and LPG for heating and cooking, and diesel for power generation, and therefore, policies on increasing electrification is also recommended. Although varies from country to country, the cumulative contribution of office, hospital, retail, hotel, and other commercial spaces are almost equal to the entire region. The energy intensity reduction to any of these facilities could provide significant improvement to the whole sectors. Residential sector energy consumption is expected to increase 1.5 times in 2050. The sector is mainly electrified and consumes a large share of biomass for heating and cooking. Efficient lighting and appliances policies on increased electrification and clean cooking, therefore very crucial. Maps and labeling were seen as effective policies in several countries in member states that could be adopted by the region as a whole. We do have this very interesting and very straightforward activities. We call it the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, or APAEC in short, phase 2. Right now we have 2021 to 2025. The set goal for this APAEC is to achieve energy intensity reduction target of 32% by 2025 based on 2005 levels. And these APAEC phase 2 building are considered a key sector to support the transition alongside the goal to achieve the RE share of 23% in total primary energy and also RE share of 35% in total installed power capacity. To meet the goals, APAEC phase 2, the buildings sector will need to become highly energy efficient and use primarily zero carbon energy sources. In 2020 alone, building accounted for 23% of total final energy consumption in ASEAN, with 17% and 6% for residential and service building respectively. And for 27% of total energy and process-related direct and indirect carbon dioxide emission that amounted up to 0.4 gigaton carbon dioxide. And also urbanization rate is expected to increase from 50% in 2018 to 60% by 2040, adding 120 million of urban dwellers, increasing floor area by 60%. So it's quite a large number. And the ASEAN building energy consumption is expected to grow by around 60% in 2030 and by 120% in 2040, while energy efficiency measures could help to mitigate this growth by at least 20%. A joint collaboration of the International Energy Agency, thank you, and ACE and the EENC SSN subsector network counted 10 member states in Southeast Asia. And the project aims to develop a detailed roadmap for the buildings and construction sectors and a roadmap for space cooling in the ASEAN region to help reducing energy demand in the sectors and improving stakeholder collaboration. In the APEC phase 2 that we have, buildings are considered a key sector to support the transition alongside with the RE, of course. And our report showing a lot of activities under this ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation. And this roadmap for energy efficient building and construction in ASEAN identifies timelines, milestones, action and activities across 7 action areas. And each of these areas provide a structure that includes a vision as well as option for action and activities to support the transition to net zero carbon building and construction. The roadmap implementation will result in multiple benefits, improving energy efficiency and decarbonization of buildings, offers a number of economic, social, and environmental benefits beyond energy savings and emission reduction that includes contribution to low carbon initiative, improving energy security, and of course, creation a new business and industry and green recovery. The roadmap outlines key recommendations across 7 action areas that constitute a possible policy package to support transition towards more energy efficient and low carbon buildings. An effective policy package covers all 7 action areas described above and includes a combination of regulation, incentives, and also information policy instrument. Combining push, lift, and pull approach, regulation push of energy efficiency across the market. And once regulatory policies are in place, their effective implementation and enforcement could be supported, lifted by information policy instrument and incentive to ensure compliance and further progress. The incentive provide a pull to shift the market towards high efficiency. And several member states have made a progress, as shown over here, in developing building energy codes and or building standards. However, they are not always mandatory and often cover only part of the building sectors, for example, large non-residential buildings. And this partial coverage substantially limits their impacts on the overall improvement of the building sector's energy performance. Given that building energy codes typically focus on the new buildings, the energy performance of existing buildings of those undergoing major renovation is often not covered by energy efficiency regulation. And the ASEAN Building Roadmap from IEA is guiding the development of NZC target from all perspectives around the building aspect, urban planning, where buildings are mostly found, and new existing building materials and construction techniques, including system and operation, low-hanging fruit, as I mentioned previously, and including sustainable energy, the grid interactive building, and of course, the resiliency of the building itself. The figures summarize the key milestone of proposed ASEAN Building Roadmap towards net zero building. And the roadmap is also provide a range of policy measures available to support net zero carbon, efficient and resilient buildings and construction in the region, providing a baseline of their current status and future goals for the region. This is a policy package for the buildings, explaining from the roadmap that we have approach regarding regulation of the buildings, information on standard and best practices and types of incentive, and successful policy package often combine a mix of policy from across the categories. And the roadmap provide analysis on each activities. Developing, implementing building energy performance codes, promote the use of certification programs, build capacity among government and industrial sectors, and building capacity for financing sustainable low-carbon buildings. Last slide. Highly energy efficient, I think the use of primary zero carbon energy sources is very important. In the commercial buildings, energy efficiency can potentially reduce the total energy demand from 92 million ton oil equivalent to 43 million ton oil equivalent. And I think that's all my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much.